What if The Legend of Zelda was an online multiplayer game? Imagine fighting your friends with all the iconic items like the boomerang or the bow, and using the hook shot to move quickly around the map. Would this be a good use of my time? Am I really going to spend the next month making this? To answer that question, I decided to ask some of the most biased people I know. And hey, they all said it's a good idea, so I started off by creating a new Unity project, made an empty plane, added a bean because it's my uncle's third favorite shape, and gave it some player movement. Now that we have the movement done, it's time to implement the networking. I decided to use mirror networking because I'm used to it and I used it in my Steam game before. After importing it into Unity, I decided to do the basic setup process, and I opened it in 2 windows just to test out the game, and it was not working. So there's a few issues right now, one of which is whenever you spawn in you don't see the right camera, and there's also another one where sometimes you can control both players. Now we're going to tackle the camera issue first. So after some minor debugging, I noticed that the problem was that all cameras were active at once. This caused all players to see the same camera. So I fixed this by going into the player prefab and disabling the camera, and then during the first frame of the player joining the game, it checks to see if your connection owns that player prefab and enables the camera if that's true. There's also the issue of broken input. During my initial test when I tried to move my player, it would move all connected players. I fixed this by disabling the movement script if the current player does not belong to your connection. Now that the game is in a somewhat working state, I'm kinda getting sick of this blank flat plane, so I'm gonna make a sandbox level to help test the movement and prepare for testing items when I get to the point of adding them. I don't want anything complicated, just a few cubes will do the job. I kinda thought that the movement was missing something, so I copied the air strafing code from my game Grapple Combat into this one, and I gotta say the movement just feels so much better now. It's a lot more natural and smooth. We have multiplayer now, but it's not really much of a Zelda game without anything Zelda related. So I decided it's finally time to start working on the items. So I planned out the initial items I planned to add on my Trello board, and also showed how I want them to work. I thought about how I wanted the item choosing system to work because I didn't want to be stuck with one item because that's very limiting and not very fun. I couldn't really think of anything until I was replaying Majora's Mask and I had an idea. In Majora's Mask there's 4 item buttons. One is dedicated to your sword, and then there's the 3 base buttons which you can customize which item they're bound to. I found this was a really good solution, so I bound one on the keyboard to the player's sword and let them choose what 2, 3, and 4 were. Now that we have the system to allow players to select their items, it's time to make the items themselves. And before I make the logic, I'm going to make some prototype blockouts of the weapons using cubes just to make it a bit easier. Now that I had the prototype models, I could begin working on the weapon logic. I decided I wanted to make use of the switching items, so I decided that weapons could complement each other. For example, the fire rod can create small fires on the ground that can be used as upstreams for the paraglider. Definitely not based on anything at all. I even added small little details like arrows getting stuck in the surface they hit, but with another major feature out of the way, I decided it was time to open it up in another window to test. We have an issue. The item the player is holding wasn't syncing properly, so I stored the current slot the player was using as a sync fire and sent it across the server. You'd think this would fix it, but it only half worked. On other players' screens, if you had slot 3 selected, you'd be holding the item that they had in slot 3. I fixed this by putting a do not destroy and load inventory manager in the menu that stores your selected items. Then when your player spawns, it pulls the variables from the inventory manager. It then stores these in sync variables. I tested this again and it finally works. Sometimes a simple solution is the best one. I can even change the variables in the inspector during runtime and it works. There's a small issue. The vast majority of the items I just made are completely useless. This is because there's no health system. So I give the player a slider to function as their health bar, and I wrote a script to handle damage and also made it store kills and damage dealt. I tested with 2 players and it worked completely fine, but when I tested with 3 the health was out of sync, because when one player did damage to the target and another player also did damage to that target, the target would receive the damage correctly, but on other players' screens the target wouldn't have died because the health wouldn't be 0, causing weird ghost players. I fixed this by syncing the health through the server and it's now working pretty well. There's no proper death system right now, I'm just making the player invisible, but we're gonna do that later. Honestly, I'm getting kinda sick of looking at this debug level because I just hate squares so much. I'm sorry to any squares in the audience, you know. And now that the majority of the game's systems are in place, I think it's time to start working on the first map. I want this map to make good use of the whip, so I want to have ropes going across the map that you can swing off using the whip. I decided I'm going to make a town map. I know it's very original. So I made some models for buildings and props. And I made the map have an aspect of verticality to it. There's a central target that you can hookshot to, and I think it's going to be really fun to play on. You might have noticed whenever I killed that person, the game just kept going on forever. I can't really have this in the final game, so I'm going to implement a game logic system. I started off by making a game manager object, and at the start of the game it picks a random mode, elimination or respawns. I made it so whenever the player dies, the camera is disabled, the player model is disabled, the hitbox is disabled, the weapons are disabled, and the physics are disabled. And then if it's elimination mode, a recurring timer runs and it checks the amount of players alive every few seconds, and whenever the alive players variable is less than or equal to 1, it displays the winner, or if it was a draw. And well, it's a bit more complicated for respawns mode, as when you die you're spawned back in at a random spawn position, and once the timer runs out, the player with the greatest amount of kills was awarded the win. Then the players are sent back to a test lobby scene I made with a ready up system. Now that the game is starting to both look and feel better, some things are starting to seem out of place. No, not the player model, the weapons. They're just some white squares, and you know how much I hate squares. So it's time to make some actual models. After a lot of work, these models look far better than the previous ones that honestly just look sad. And another side effect is that you can actually tell what other people are holding because there's actually colors. After I updated these weapons, I decided to play around with them a bit, and I noticed a glitch. If you hit with the sword and switch weapon during the animation, the variable is attacking, which I use for collision detection and damage logic, would never be reset. So if you pull back out the sword, it would constantly be attacking. Funnily enough, there's actually a similar glitch in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask called ISG, which could be performed by interrupting a crouch stab with an interaction. In my game, it's very broken for combat, but in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, you use it to avoid falling off ledges and do a technique called bomb hovering. Anyways, I fixed it by resetting the is attacking booth each time the sword is pulled out. If you're watching this video and want to learn programming, I would have to recommend today's sponsor, Brilliant.org. It has so many courses ranging from large language models, programming, and even maths. With Brilliant, you don't just learn. With Brilliant, you learn by doing. If you want to build a powerful daily learning habit, click the link in the description for a 30-day free trial with the code brilliant.org/sharpvortexgames. Again, that's brilliant.org/sharpvortexgames. Now back to the video. A real game needs a main menu, and while I'm kinda lazy and running low on time, so I'm just gonna copy the scene from my game Grapple Combat and save like 4 hours, and all the scripts are missing. After adding back all the scripts, I decided I'm gonna make this a placeholder because I haven't even finished the Grapple Combat main menu. Whenever I finish that, I can just copy it in with the scripts. I tried to test the game with some people, but unfortunately right now, you have to join by IP address, and there's no server browser or anything, but when I tried to play, like 26 bald men showed up to my house, and it was very hard to get rid of them. So I decided to use Steam networking. This shouldn't be too difficult as I've used this before. So I imported Fizzy Steamworks Transport for Mirror, and I imported the Steamworks.net package. After that, I made a hosting system so you can host lobbies and invite your friends, and I used next-gen Steam networking to ensure the player's IP address is protected. I also copied the server list from Grapple Combat so you can join any server you want. To be honest, this prototype is looking really good for only 2 weeks of work. When I do more updates, maybe you'll have a chance to play test this in the Discord in the description, but I'm running really low on time right now, so I'm gonna have to end this here. I forgot to say I replaced the Bean character model with the player model from my game Grapple Combat. I'm gonna make another one soon, but this is slightly better than looking at the Bean. Also, I'd appreciate if you checked out my last video. It did kinda shit. It's about my other game, and if you like this video, YouTube thinks you like this video, and thank you for watching.